Hello, my pups, my puppers, and my friends. Welcome to the first reading session with me, 101 Dalmatian Lover. Today I'm going to be reading The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. Let's get to chapter 1 here. Chapter 1 Endless Waiting, Endless Drilling. It was dawn on a spring morning in 1863, and the young Union soldiers of the 304th Regiment were just waking up. Most of the 304th were farm boys from New York State, who had enlisted in the Army of the North now. They were camped in a rough log huts and tents on a hillside somewhere in the northern Virginia. From their position, they could see the wooden hills opposite them, rising above the distant trees, were scattered puffs of smoke, the remains of the Confederate campfires. Oh, so this is back in the Civil War. Oh boy. That had been burning throughout the night. For months, the raw troops of the 304th had been at this camp. They had seen no fighting and had only heard reports of great fights between the Union and the Confederate armies in the Civil War. By now, the men were disappointed, frustrated, and bored. They had spent the war drilling endlessly on any open fields their lieutenants could find and waited endlessly for orders to go into battle. Stretching and yawning as they came out of their tents, Henry Fleming and Tom Wilson, two close friends, heading for the campfires. The regiments cooked and poured hot coffee into tin cups from the soldiers gathered around him. In between pouring, he was strilling, stirring the men's breakfast. I'm stupid, I'm sorry. Stirring the men's breakfast in a big black pot that was suspended over the campfire. Once breakfast was over, the men scattered about the camp, each looking for ways to keep busy and make the wait less boring. Friends, close wake up. I'm sure it was a riveting time back then with your black coffee. I think I'll clean my rifle, said Tom. Even though I did it 2 days ago, ain't nothing much else to do. I guess I'll write to my ma, said Henry. She worries if she don't hear from me regular, specifically since Pa died. I know it's hard running the farm without me helping. Before the two started off, they heard shouts from the path that led to a small creek below the camp. Running up the path was Jim Coughlin. I'm not joking, that's his name. Another of the farm boys in their regiment. Jim was waving a wet shirt high above his head to attract attention. Hey, Jim, called Henry. What you doing all that shouting for? I got news, hollered Jim, trying to catch his breath as a crowd of soldiers surrounded him. Listen here, I was just down at the creek washing my shirt, and one of them cavalry fellas was there washing his horse. His brother's works at division's headquarters, and he told I'm our regiment's going up the river tomorrow and coming around over them hills behind them rebels. That's a lie, shouted a corporal. Ye don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, added Tom Wilson. I don't believe this army ever gonna move. Why, we got ready to move 8 times these last 2 weeks, and we ain't moving one single step. The men began arguing among themselves, some believing Jim, others accusing him of making up the story to feel important. Henry listened to these arguments first with some doubt, then with eagerness. So at last, I'm gonna to fight, he whispered to himself. His eyes glowed as he remembered how from the time he was old enough to read, he had pictured himself a hero in every battle throughout history, in every battle in every corner of the world. So when the war had come in, it was important to Henry to be part of it. His mother had called him a fool and discouraged him. But Henry was determined and had enlisted in a company that was formed in their hometown. When he walked into the barn in his shiny blue uniform, his mother went went right on milking their cow, though tears ran down her wrinkled cheeks and her thin body began to quiver, and she spoke to him. "You're taking care of yourself, son. You do what you do what they tell you. And don't you get it in the company of wild fellers who drink and answer. Remember that your pa taught you not to think anything except what's right." Before leaving to join his regiment, Henry had stopped at his school to say goodbye to his friends. The young people had crowded around him, admiring his blue uniform with its shiny brass buttons, and praised him for the bravery. Even the girls looked at him, adoringly, and Henry was beaming with pride. On the march from New York to Washington, the recruiter the recruits were welcomed at each town. People prepared feasts, young girls smiled and flirted with them, and old men complimented them on their bravery. Henry felt like a hero even before his first battle, but then had come months and months of boredom at this campsite in northern Virginia, where the recruits had done nothing but drill, or try to keep warm, or sit and twiddle their thumbs. The other enemy Henry had seen or heard was a lone guard on duty on the southern side of a nearby river when Henry was on patrol on the northern side. "Yankee boy," the ragged guard had called to him, "y'all seem like a right good young feller. A little dumb, mid, for fighting, but right good." Henry couldn't help but chuckle, liking the man's instantly liking the man instantly and regrettingly for the moment that this friendly man was his enemy. Now Henry lay on his bunk, excited at the thought of his regiment was finally about to go into battle. But suddenly he began to have thoughts and some doubts. Think I'd be brave enough to stay and fight, or will I be a coward and run away from the battle? He asked himself. Henry jumped from his bunk and began to pace the floor. "Good God, what's the matter with you?" he cried out loud in a panic. Just then, the two close friends, Jim Conklin and Tom Wilson, entered the tent. They were still arguing over the news Jim had brought back with the creek. Henry nervously turned to Jim, whom he had known and trusted since childhood. "Are you sure there's going to be a battle?" "Of course," Jim answered confidently. "Just wait till tomorrow. You'll see one at the biggest battle ever saw." "A thundering lie," grumbled Tom from a corner of the tent. Henry ignored Tom's grumbling and asked Jim, "How do you think the regiment will do?" "Well, I guess we'll fight all right once the battle begins, though lots of veterans been poking fun at us 'cause we're new." "Think any of our boys will run away?" continued Henry. "A few, maybe, but that happens in every regiment the first time boys are under fire. Admitted the whole regiment run if the fighters tough at the beginning. But then again, they might just stay and fight like real good once they get shooting." "And what about you, Jim?" Henry asked with a nervous giggle, as if he meant his question as a joke. But Jim was serious in his answer. "I suppose if them fighting's real hot and a lot of boys start to run, I guess I'd run too. But if every boy's body is a stand and a fighting's, I'd stand and fight too." Henry was grateful for his friend's words, They seemed to they seemed to reassure him that he was not alone in his doubts and fears. Thanks, Jim, he said softly. Thanks a heap. This is chapter 2. Rumors or facts. When the following morning proved Jim's story to be only a rumor, the whole regiment made fun of him, even those who had believed him the days before. Henry, however, took no part in this teasing, for he was still troubled by his own secret doubts. Will I be brave when I go into battle, or will I be a coward? He asked himself. If only I could find another soldier who was this same doubt. But whenever he tried to start a conversation with any of the men, he had no luck. Each man was absolutely certain he'd be a hero in battle, though sometimes Henry believed they were as frightened as he was. Should I admit my doubts to them? He asked himself, then decided, no! They'd only ridicule me, just as they're ridiculing Jim. I guess the only way I'll ever know the answer is when I actually get into battle. Days went by, and one morning, when the regiment had formed ranks just before dawn, the colonel was riding up on his horse. At rest, he ordered. The regiment stood at rest for what seemed like hours, their eyes fixed on the colonel, who calmly stroked his mustache as he looked across the river at the enemy campfires. Those must be some pretty interesting campfires. After a while, a messenger came riding up along the road and reined his horse beside the colonel. They had a short conversation, then the colonel called out, Let's move! Cannons creaked and rumbled behind the troops as the men stumbled along through the woods. They finally reached a road where other regiments joined in the march. By the time the sun had risen in the sky, the men were certain now that they had finally on their way into battle, and they laughed and sang all the way as they marched. At one point, the road took them past a farmhouse where a horse was tied up out front. Looks like a real fine animal to carry my knapsack, said a rather sloppy soldier as he left his column and headed toward the horse. Just as he was about to untie the animal, a young woman rushed out the door and seized the horse's mane. Leave my horse alone, you thief! She cried, and she began beating at the soldier with her fist. This amused the men in the regiment, and they stopped their march and gathered around the two people. Hit him with a stick, one soldier shouted, encouraging the woman. That's funny. Pull that soldier boy by his mane, too, shouted another one. The soldier had to let go of the horse to protect himself from the woman's blows. He finally gave up and hurled back to the jeers of his regiment. Some hero! Ha! Try going after a skunk next time. Maybe she'd fight better in the regiment than you. Still in good spirits, the troops continued their march until nightfall, when they broke up into individual regiments. They set up tents in the fields and lit campfires. Henry lay down in the grass, a distance from the other men in the regiment. He wanted to be by himself. After a while, Tom Wilson walked over to him. What are you doing all the way over here, Henry? Oh, thinking. Tom sat down and slowly lit his pipe. He took a long draw, then smiled gleefully. We got 'em now, Henry. We going to lick 'em up good. Then Tom turned serious. Actually, they've been licking us in every battle till now. But this time I feel it in my bones. We'll lick 'em. We'll lick 'em good. That is a very bad phrase to use for this. I thought you were objecting